Hi, my name's Clare, and I wanted to share some of my recent experiences that I've had during my cancer journey. I was diagnosed with a stage 3 aggressive breast cancer last August. I have completed 5 rounds of high dose chemotherapy, two types, and immunotherapies. So I had 9-hour infusions for the first 2 rounds and then 7-hour infusions after that. I then continued with the immunotherapies, dropping the chemos. I had my operation early February. I had a complete pathological response under my lymph nodes, but not in my breast, although I had a very, very good response, 98% complete response. But I did have a 2 millimetre residue. If I hadn't, I wouldn't have had the radiotherapy. I'd already decided not to have the radiotherapy and to potentially cut my immunotherapy treatment short. However, because I hadn't, I then took the decision to switch to a new drug called Clare, I think, which is a combination of chemotherapy and targeted immunotherapy. And to continue that course until October. It is now May. And I'm having my last round of radiotherapy today. I have had a more intensive round than the traditional round, but I've still had that treatment plan. And I feel very confident in the decisions I've made. Had you asked me a year ago, would I even have chemotherapy? I would have said no. But I've been tuning into my body the whole way through. I've been offering myself up during meditations, and I've been guided into the decisions that I've made throughout this journey. I'm feeling more empowered than I've ever felt in my entire life. And not only that, I already felt empowered early on during my chemotherapy high dose, but I've had a shift recently. I had a spiritual awakening about 2 weeks ago, and it's illuminated all the teachings, all the understandings that I already had about spirituality, about non-reaction, about the fact that we're already whole, we're already perfect, about the fact that we are all interconnected. I have experienced on quite a profound level that when you experience it, it's very difficult to describe, because everything just is what it is, and all of the projections, the stories, the values, the socialization, the samskaras as we're taught in yoga, sin as we're taught in Christianity, it all goes. It goes, and it went for me in a moment. Something I heard on a podcast illuminated everything. So that's been really, really interesting for me. So I guess the first thing I really wanted to share is how that you can be going through something that we label as bad, negative, difficult, horrible, traumatic, and I know it is for a lot of people. But for me, it's been liberating, empowering, freeing, beautiful. I've had moments, but not many. I feel more emotionally balanced than I've ever felt my entire life. I feel more assured in decisions that I make, more than I ever have in my entire life. And now I can see how I wasn't in my personal power for probably forever. Probably this is the first time I've ever felt completely in my personal power. Not my mum and dad's, not the schools, not the churches, my own personal power. And that is where liberation comes in. And what I've experienced is that when we talk about, it's interesting because higher self is what really explains it. When we talk about higher power, we're not talking about higher power outside of ourselves. We're talking about, which I already understood that we have got a place of power within ourselves. But what I experienced is that we are here existing now in this earthly plane, our spirits, but at the same time we are also in the universe, almost like a fan club. It's almost like we have our own fan club up supporting us whilst we're down here. But if we don't connect with that, what I now perceive or have visualised as my higher self, if we don't tap into that, then we are disconnected from who we really are. Or when it's hard, I don't think you can be in your personal power because you're not understand. That's your source, that's your root. Your root is you, and your higher self is with God and part of God. We all are. So we're all, that's this whole interconnection. We're all down here now having an earthly experience and in the universe at the same time. And it makes, when I think about that, it makes perfect sense from all the teachings and everything I've experienced. I meditate quite frequently, and I really feel I can tap into the deep knowingness and beingness within, and that's guided me through this entire journey. And actually that came from a divorce that I had 5 or 6 years ago, which was a very challenging situation for me. If it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be dealing with this in this way. So that's another example that how obstacles on the path are there for our spiritual involvement, and that if we use it for in spiritual involvement, then we don't get so affected by things that come into our paths that we would normally judge as good or bad. So I'm very conscious that it is because of past, what we label as past difficulties or traumas, that have enabled me to have this experience during my cancer. So the realization that we are our own higher selves, when you realize that, so that's kind of self-realization, when you realize that, suddenly all the samskaras, outdated beliefs, stories, projections, they become null and void. None of those matter anymore, because you're connected to your source in your own power. So you don't need to take on any other ideologies or socializations or stories, because you can root yourselves in what you directly are, if that makes sense. So that was my kind of spiritual awakening that I had recently. And since then, I have noticed how, I was already pretty well balanced, but I have felt more grounded. And when things have come up for me, so during my radiotherapy treatment, the machine had broken down, they messed up some of my appointments. Then they asked me if I could move to Eastbourne, and then they said they were going to keep me at Brighton. And then 2 hours before my first appointment, they asked me if I could go to Eastbourne after all, because of a machine that had broken down. So I went with it, non-resistance, yeah, fine. And the journey over there was beautiful. The trees were so green. I just felt this sense of aliveness, which Eckhart Tolle talks about in The Power of Now. But I wasn't practicing that. I haven't been sitting down meditating every day. When you're connected to source, it's just there. So in affirmations, practices, all of those things are really good for centering and grounding. But once you're liberated, it's you're just like that anyway. It becomes just natural. And that's kind of what I wanted to share, that all the practices we do are really helpful, and then just this light bulb moment, and then there's no effort with any of it. It just is. Anyway, so I went over in my car. I really enjoyed the journey. The staff were great. The centre was very modern. Didn't feel rushed at all. I was welcomed. I got chatting to the guy behind reception who had done a panchakarma in India just over about a year and a half ago. And there were people on there that were detoxing from chemotherapy. So that was an interesting conversation. And interestingly, I've met somebody 2 days before who were talking about doing the same thing in Sri Lanka. So there's some synchronicity there. So I'll be looking into doing something like that later on. So just, an example that many people will have of when you practice or you don't resist, you go with the flow. Actually, you can end up having a really nice experience. Whereas I could have begrudged having to go to Eastbourne, been really worried about the treatment. I could have, been crying. I could have been really traumatised by it. I could have gone in with a negative attitude and then not had a nice conversation with the receptionist. And I could have been tense when I was having my radiotherapy treatment. And actually, it was quite funny, because when you have radiotherapy, you put your arms back, and I did say, this is a bit 50 Shades of Grey. You do feel a bit vulnerable, because you've got, obviously, you're exposed, and your arms are in, they're being pinned back. And I closed my eyes and I went into meditation, and I called in protection, and I visualised healing light and energy, but also protection was the main thing, because obviously I'm very aware that there's this very small risk of malignancy, and the lungs are being with a slither of the lungs that are going to be treated. There's no avoiding that. So I was very conscious of that and calling that in. And after the treatment, the guy came in and said, I don't think I've ever seen anybody as zen as you on the couch. And actually that was a really nice thing to hear. But so this idea of going with the flow, taking responsibility, I made the decision to have the radiotherapy. Nobody's forcing me to have it. I can walk out at any time. I don't have to sign a disclaimer. So if I'm choosing to, then go in with that attitude of gratitude. I'm grateful that I'm able to choose. I'm grateful that I'm able to receive this treatment. I'm grateful the staff are in place. We're very lucky where we are. There's plenty of people in the world that don't even have that offered as a treatment. So my whole, understanding actually of the medical profession has changed during this journey. Although, yes, of course, there are an awful lot of restrictions, limitations, and shortfalls. But that's where we can use our own wisdom and our own resources to add value to what the medical professions can offer us, and also to actually say no to what we don't want from the medical professions. I haven't taken any side effect medications for any of my treatments. I don't take the anti-sickness before my chemotherapy at the moment. I didn't have the antihistamine. I don't take any of the medications they offer for you to have at home. I didn't have hardly any with my high dose. I did have a tiny bit on the first round because I asked my oncologist if I could not take any, and she said, I think you should. So I had a bit, and I just intuitively felt, actually, I really don't need this, and I didn't. I had no steroids. I had the ones that they give you because they wouldn't not let me, but the rest at home, I didn't have any steroids. I did take the injections for my white blood cells, and that was it. No anti-sickness, no constipation, no diarrhea medication at all, and I have never felt sick from the start up until now. I'm still on chemotherapy now. I feel better than I've ever felt. I feel more healthier than I've ever felt. I feel more in balance than I've ever felt. Yes, I had side effects with my high dose, but minimal. No sickness ever with any of it. No tiredness, yes, with the high dose, but now with the low dose, no constipation. I'm going to share on a different recording how I've been supporting myself with that. But the power lies within you. The healing ultimately comes from within us as well. We're healing. It's all about bringing your body back into balance. There doesn't need to be this big fear story. Well, I know it is obviously it is. There is a lot of fear around it, and I know for a lot of people it's it does cause a lot of suffering, and I have complete compassion and empathy for that. And I know it affects different people at different times of our lives, and we're on different paths at different times. So all of those things will contribute to our own individual experiences. But I do feel that my calling now is to help empower other people who are on the journey in a way that is right for them at that time. We're all going to have different experiences, but if my experience can help to support or empower others, then that's where I feel like I'm here and want to support and share. So I hope this has offered some insight to some ideas, or just to some sharings, and I'll talk more on other recordings. Thanks for listening, and take care.